Welcome to Forbidden Planet TV. I'm Andrew Sumner, and on today's episode of Forbidden Planet TV, I have with me my old friend, the brand manager of 2000 AD, Michael Molcher, aka Molcher. How you doing, mate?
I'm very well, Borak Thung.
Borak Dung indeed, Earthlet. I should have thought of that, mate. I don't know. Long time reader. Bought Prog One in real time on my paper round, after my paper round. So you of course have been involved. How long have you been involved with 2000 AD now, Michael?
It's just turned over 12 years.
Wow, 12 epic years of your life.
Yeah, it's sorry, you set me off there. I mean, there's been highs and lows, but yeah, it's been quite something. I mean, to think that I was this little kid buying, the best of 2000 AD on a wet Easter weekend in Conwy, in North Wales, and all this time later, it's just when I stop to think about it, it's very surreal.
Yeah.
That my great lifelong passion for one thing is now has been my job for this long, a quarter of my life, which is just
Has ended up being your career. I mean, I think it's I'm a big proponent of it being a glorious thing when that happens. As somebody who's in a not dissimilar boat, to end up working on the things that you love, it's an amazing feeling. Do you know what I mean? And I don't know if you experience this, but I often get a sense of how did this exactly happen? How do you find yourself sometimes thinking, how precisely did I get into this moment?
Yeah, and so much of it is was pure happenstance. It was just one thing happened after another. All the way back to getting into journalism when I was at university, and the little voice in my head telling me, "You want to do this option, and do this," and I just did it, and then getting to know Leah Moore and John Reppion.
Yeah, great friends of mine as well, mate. Yeah,
Wonderful,
as you may know.
yeah, and them introducing me to Alan, so I was able to interview Alan for my old fanzine, which then led to doing features for the Judge Dredd magazine with interviewing creators. So, and then this job popped up, and 2000 AD already knew who I was. They knew that, I knew my stuff. I was working in PR by that time, and so it just, it's just, like I said, one thing after another, and then you kind of look back and go, oh, well, what an extraordinary piece of good fortune.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's wonderful. I don't think, I mean, you and I have spent a lot of time over the last 12 years or so hanging out at various comic conventions in the US in various different kind of ways and different kinds of configurations.
Yeah, various different kinds of bars, certainly.
Exactly right on, mate. Exactly. But before we get into any of that, because I want to touch on a bit more of that. You're here, of course. There are many great things in the world of 2000 AD that we could be talking about today. But the thing we're actually talking about is deeply personal to you, and that's your new book, new and excellent book, I have to say, mate. I Am the Law: How Judge Dredd Predicted Our Future. Now, we'll get into that in a second, but you've just touched upon something I'm interested in, is when were you first exposed to 2000 AD and first exposed to Dredd, what were the circumstances?
It was that Easter weekend in 1988, Best of 2000 AD issue 30, I think it was, and it opens up with the reason I picked it up. I'd been reading the Marvel UK Transformers comic, for a few years by that point, which is brilliant. But I was a big sucker for a club.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah, I never collected the Beano and everything, but that kind of readers club kind of stuff. And like when my favorite cartoon when I was a kid was the Real Ghostbusters.
Yeah, right on. Yeah.
And when Marvel UK did a comic book of that, the back cover was like an ID wallet. to say that you're a real Ghostbuster. And my dad and I, bless him, he was like, don't cut this up. It's a first issue. It might be worth something in but I just wanted to be a real Ghostbuster. So I ended up in floods of tears because he's like, no, don't cut up. No. So I was a sucker for a club. Yeah. And the front page of Best of 2000 AD just said, join the VCs. And I thought it was a club you could join. And
brilliant.
It was just a really great bit of kind of cover furniture by I presume Steve McManus or Robin Smith or whoever was art editor at the time. And so I got this, and it's the VCs: Jerry Findlay Day, Mick McMahon, Gary Leach, Cam Kennedy. Absolutely stunning. So it's the first half of that, and then in the middle was Judge Dredd Hot Dog Run by John Wagner, Alan Grant, and Ron Smith, and that that's an underappreciated gem. Is that story? I think it's a real classic. And that was it. And I read Best of Two, so I was absorbing all these incredible, first golden age stories. Halo Jones, Strontium Dog. I've got the 2 pages from the end of Strontium Dog Rage up on my wall because it was the first time I'd ever cried at a comic book that I wasn't trying to cut up. Yeah. It changed everything, and then I didn't start getting the prog until beginning of '91.
Yeah.
And it was when the Gulf War was on, and they'd done like a camo wraparound cover. Steve Cook had done I think it was Steve Cook. He's Steve Cook or Ryan Hughes done this wraparound camo cover. And that was it. There was I came in right after the end of Necropolis, and one of the great things about 2000 AD is you can just start anywhere, and that's always been true.
Yeah.
So I came in like the Judge Dredd story was literally kind of an aftermath story of a major event, and it didn't matter.
Yeah, I think that is very well said. It's the jumping on points are endless, are they not?
Yeah, and we try to make it as easy as possible by having like jumping on issues and Best of 2000 AD graphic novel series that our good friend Owen Johnson has done. That makes it easier. But the number of stories I've heard over the years where people say, "Oh yeah, I just picked it up and it was great, so I just kept reading." There aren't many comics like that.
No, I completely agree with everything you're saying, mate. What was your first impression of Dredd? When you first absorbed Dredd, how did it impact upon you?
That's a really good question, actually. I think I think ultimately why he engaged with me and why I love the Hot Dog Run as a story is because of how no nonsense he is. And we'll come on to talk about this, but the thing about Dredd is that he's that vision of kind of superhuman efficiency. A man who's been cloned to be the exemplar, the embodiment of the law,
the perfect evocation of what he does.
Yeah, and also, and this this goes back to everyone working on that strip, John, Alan, and Ron. It felt like a completely fleshed out world. There was so much detail. I often think that the most engaging comics are the ones that don't really explain everything, but have lots of detail. So there are various references during the course of it. And if somebody had been reading since Prog 1, they would have got all those references.
Yeah.
But I, as a complete newbie, was reading this stuff, and just the words that I didn't understand, or the terms or the references, were just setting my imagination off. And that was especially true. The back cover was one part of was it Dave Gibbons? I think they were reprinting like the Dave Gibbons multi-image poster.
Oh yeah, I know that one well. Yeah, absolutely.
We did it as a subscriber gift just recently. I may be misremembering. It might have been a different one, but anyway, The back cover was like 1/6 of this poster, and it was the robots of 2000 AD. Now, I didn't know any of these characters from Adam, but now I know there was Call Me Kenneth, there was Walter, there was the ABC Warriors were on there. You know, there was reference to Roadbusters and all this and other. Like the Terramex from Robo Hunter and all this and the other. And what was so special about that cover? I stared at that for hours. Like I said, I didn't know who any of these characters were, but they looked fantastic. And it just, my imagination erupted. Not necessarily with me making up definite stories and, you know, giving them names and all this, that, and the other, but just the possibilities of these fantastic designs. So many of them created by Kevin O'Neill, and Mick McMahon and Ian Gibson. That it was on, you know, I'd love to Transformers stuff and everything, but these seemed like just wild designs for characters. You know, they weren't toys that I could buy.
Yeah.
Or versions of them. They were just incredible. And so you know, and then once you start getting into 2000 AD, you realize that's just like part of it. And so as a kid, mind blown. You know?
So what you're encountering, it's really, I think, one of the beautiful things about those moments, you know, when you tap into what is an overarching, wildly creative universe, and you're just looking at a bit of it, is if it grabs you, part of what you're getting is it's a kind of glorious roadmap to creative discovery, and you get the sense that you're at step one, and if you and it gives you the opportunity to jump in, and it gives you an entire, you know, lifelong or years long mission when you're a kid to go in and discover all this stuff, and that's an exciting moment, isn't it? It's like just opening the door to Arcadia or whatnot.
Yeah, and I think it's actually, you know, there are plenty of people who you know, 2000 AD isn't as good as it used to be, blah 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 blah. Forgetting the fact that we're not kids, we're not 8. Yeah. And the world, sadly, is very different when you're an adult. But I think those moments can still happen when you're an adult. It's really nice to see, you know, grown people discover 2000 AD and have a similar epiphany. Not in exactly the same way, but just to see them. And I'm gonna kind of fall into a little of Beetlejuicean language here, but you know, when they kind of get the taste of thrill power for the first time, and you can see them go, "This is really great." There's a podcast called I Read Comic Books, and they've been. It's great listening to them because they've been falling over themselves with the best of 2000 AD graphic novels, and they've been following up on other stuff. And you can just hear it in their voice. That like the addiction has started, like the thrill power has got into them, and they're like, "This is just I can't express how good this stuff is." And like someone was saying, you know, they read the first book of Brink, the Dan Abnett, Ian Colbard series in Best of 2000 AD, and I went out and just bought all 5 collections of it. Just straight off the bat, you know, and that's always been part of my job. It's just to get it in front of people because it's such good stuff, whether it's the classic stuff or the modern stuff. That all you've got to do is show it to people, and they go, "Oh yeah, oh now I get it." Now I think why it's the Galaxy Great.
I think it was such a masterstroke to come up with a huge creative backstory around the pure act of editing 2000 AD and the whole Tharg mythology and whatnot, but also the fact that you've got your own lexicon, your own conceits about naming the people who work with the droid names and what have you. It just gives people I mean, it's kind of what back in the day in the 60s Jerry Anderson was doing with TV21, trying to link all these shows together in one universe within a comic, but this is that done to the power of 1,000, you know, and it's been so consistent and successful. Something you've touched upon is something I've always noticed about the creative power of 2000 AD and its universe is there was a time when you and I were hanging out, I was actually hanging out at your booth. I'd just come over from the Titan booth at New York Comic Con. And the previous day, you'd sold a particular collection to somebody, who was there with his kids. He came back the next day and he was like, man, I read that in one sitting. And he bought all the other volumes just in one go. That was within 24 hours. So that's an absolute evocation of exactly what you're talking about, right, mate?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And and that's one of the joys of conventions. Well, one of the joys of standing in a booth on the concrete floor for 5 days. You know, it is that moment, like I said, an epiphany, where people go, oh, I found the kind of source now, and I think actually there's kind of wider implications to that as well. And I've been accused of being hyperbolic about this, but it's not.
Hyperbolic? Surely comics are, I mean, man, you got to take a leaf out of the Stan Lee book, surely.
Oh, exactly.
There's always room for hyperbole, mate.
I mean, Tharg the Mighty makes Stanley look humble, you know. But you know, no 2000 AD, no modern comics as we know them.
Yeah, I think that is true. It is indeed hyperbolic, perhaps, but it's a hyperbolic truth. It's absolutely truth of the bullet. There can be no doubt.
You know, and it's not just like the writing of John Wagner and Alan Grant and Jerry Finley Day and Pat Mills. But you know, if Alan Grant hadn't been going through the slush pile when Alan Moore was pitching stuff,
yeah,
and if he hadn't taken the time to talk to Alan to say, you know, change this, and this, and we'll publish it. What a different world that would have been. No Watchmen, no V for Vendetta, the mature comics, the mature graphic novels phase of the 1980s would have been bereft of the British voice.
1000%. No British invasion. Yeah.
No British invasion. No Vertigo. No Modern Image. Yeah. No Modern Image. You know, the Ultimates wouldn't have happened most likely. So you know, it wouldn't have been able to draw on that for the movies. And you know, there's for better or for worse. It's very important to state this: for better or for worse, all modern that kind of the big modern comics have in their DNA 2000 AD, and that's remarkable.
I think that's very well said, and the perfect moment to segue into talking about your new book, I Am the Law, which is a fascinating concept. And before we get into talking about that, Michael is going to be signing copies of I Am the Law at Forbidden Planet Birmingham this Saturday, 25th of February at 1 p.m. So anybody who's out there in the Midlands and fancies a slice of from the source raw thrill power, come and see Michael at Forbidden Planet Birmingham, and he'll sign this brilliant book for you. What is the concept of I Am the Law, mate? Which I think is fascinating.
Thank you. So I Am the Law is basically how did this comic book published in 5- and 6-page installments, ostensibly for children, predict how our modern world would develop in terms of law and order politics, in terms of policing, in terms of economics, you know, in terms of kind of the big social questions of our day. We stand on a precipice. You know, there are numerous existential crises that loom in our future. Not to get too.
That's true.
Yeah. But alongside that, what we are faced with is the rise of a new fascism, alongside states that are clamping down on dissent, on protest, on even our ability to withdraw our labour from a neoliberal capitalism that we know is driving us off a cliff. You know, when people who are just asking for equality and fairness are brutalized in the street, when the death toll of policing, not just in the States, grows, what can this comic book teach us? And the premise of the book is that actually, through these kind of weekly satirical barbs, John Wagner, Alan Grant, Pat Mills were incredibly prescient about where we're headed. And because of that, I think I was talking to somebody about this. We did the Cartoon Museum event last night. I was talking to somebody about this. And I said, what an incredible achievement for a character like this that continues in linear time. One year in Dredd's world is 1 year in our world, so it has a unique temporal aspect to it. What an incredible achievement! 46 years of this character, continuing to call out authoritarianism and fascism and the not just the practices, but the kind of immoral underpinnings of these things as well. So the book covers everything from police forces not disciplining or firing people, and corruption, all the way through the border industrial complex that militarizes our borders, all the way through to concepts around what's called necropolitics. So when states reduce everything down to a question of life and death, and things like that. So I'm not going to say it's a cheery read.
But it is a fascinating read. Can you talk a bit about the way that concept is laid out and plays out through the book? I think it's quite interesting the way that you've done it.
Yeah, so each chapter is based on one Judge Dredd story that I've selected, specifically because it opens up a particular aspect of policing or of politics. So we start off in the 1970s, of course, with the moral panic over Action, which was the predecessor of 2000 AD. Incredibly violent. I mean, the thing about Action, it was created by Pat Mills, and was the kind of sequel to Battle Picture Weekly, which Pat and John and Jerry had created a couple of years before. And Action's just so violent. I mean, reading it now, it's still shocking.
Yeah.
Like you always get these people who go, "Oh, you wouldn't be able to do that today." Nor should you. You shouldn't have done it then. Like people being run over by motocross bikes, and kids stabbing people. It's unhinged. Fascinating.
I read those in real time in the playground at school, and I remember thinking as a kid, how are they getting away with publishing? Yeah. Do the adults know we're reading this? I remember thinking exactly that.
Nuts. It's genuinely, even something as ridiculous as Hookjaw. Dead crib for Jaws is with a giant hook in its mouth.
Watching obnoxious American school kids get torn apart by Hookjaw. There are literally whole panels devoted to that. It's unbelievable.
Crazy, absolutely crazy. But so that I start off with that, and there was this moral panic, and what I use that for is to open up the whole moral panic in the 1970s around violence and race and children, and Action kind of strode into this ongoing crisis, and then you have Dredd. And Dredd is both a reaction to and satire of the big anti kind of civil rights push of the 1970s. So there was all this social change in the late 60s and early 70s. And Stuart Hall, who's a very famous sociologist from Britain, wrote a book called Policing the Crisis. It's all about this mugging panic that happened in the early 70s. He kind of picks it apart, and he goes, actually, there wasn't like a mugging epidemic. It was just that it was what the media, what the state were doing. They were marshalling these kind of social forces to as a means of pushing back against the progressive changes that were happening. It's a really great. I kind of wish it had come out in time for me to quote in the book, but Quentin Tarantino was brought out a book of film criticism.
Oh, it's a wonderful cinema speculation. It's a wonderful book.
Yeah.
Great.
And whatever you think about his movies, at the end of the day, he's a film nerd.
Yeah.
So 100%. When he's picking stuff apart, it's actually really interesting to see his perspective. But he talks about Dirty Harry, who was one of the forebears of Judge Dredd, and he specifically says, and again, I wish I'd been able to include this in the book. It's perfect. He says, you had all the social change you in America. You had the destruction of the Jim Crow laws. You had these great pushes for racial, sexual equality. And he said, for so many people in the right wing and conservative forces, they developed essentially a case of future shock, which anyone who's had anything to do with 2000 AD knows is a term that we use an awful lot. And so there was this great backlash. And so characters like Dirty Harry, Taxi Driver, what's his face, Bickle in
Travis Bickle,
Travis Bickle, Charles Bronson in Death Wish, it's the great age of the vigilante. Pushing back against the punks and the pimps and all this, that, and the other, and these are deeply coded against black people and
against minorities, for sure.
But what Dredd is, while he's a bit like Dirty Harry, he's not a vigilante. He's not breaking the rules. He is the rules. So it turns the concept on its head. It's like, all right, well, if you want Dirty Harry, what if there's a system full of Dirty Harrys who can do whatever they want? And in doing that, it becomes this incredible satire on these kind of reactionary law and order kind of politics. And it's continued. Obviously Thatcher got elected in '79, but the writing was already on the wall well before that. I think she became Conservative leader in '75, and this strip is there, and it's this ridiculous, this man dressed in this ridiculous costume, dispensing justice, having no internal monologue whatsoever, and creating this situation where he is, as Neil Gaiman said, he's both the thing and the critique of the thing.
Yeah.
And I've said this before, but he is a Rorschach test. What do you see in him? Do you see the monster, or do you see something positive? And I think ultimately the success of a character like Dredd is because he should force you to question your assumptions, whether you think he's a monster or whether you think he's a hero, because that's critical thinking, not this bland, stupid question everything. I will question everything. I've done my own research, bollocks. But actual critical thinking that forces you to hold two thoughts in your head at exactly the same time and then let them have an argument. And this was a comic for children.
Yeah. I think this is very compelling and interesting, mate. When did you, how did you get this? What was the spark for you to create this book? Because I know that is something you've been working on for a very long time, and it's been quite the labor, not just the labor of love, but it's been hard work putting this book together for you, right?
Yeah, it's been a struggle. I've been a journalist for 20 years, and I'd kind of assumed, writing a book's just like writing a really long feature. What are you talking about? Like, each chapter is around about 5,000 words, which is roughly the length of the feature interviews I used to do for the like creator interviews I used to do for the magazine.
Deep dive articles, 5,000 words. Yeah,
absolutely. I was very wrong. But the initial spark really was the Judge Dredd Mega Collection, which was a Partworks. And for those who are listening who aren't in the UK, a Partworks is a thing that comes out every fortnight or every month in newsagents, and it's a collection of like hardcover books. I've got the entire thing down there myself.
It's a cumulative collection, isn't it?
Yeah, cumulative collection, and it's the volumes are published out of order. So you've got to, if you want the whole thing, you've got to, you either pick and choose or you get the whole thing. And I did back matter for those. I did little features, and normally in these things, by and large, they're a bit of fluff. They just, sets the context of the character and everything. I started delving into my thoughts about the strips, like plucking at the themes and the ideas within Judge Dredd, and eventually my boss at Rebellion, Ben, he said, "Why don't you turn this into a book?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, no, I can do that." And so I ended up pitching something, and it's not the book that now exists. It's basically I pitched. My original pitch came a month after George Floyd was murdered, and to be writing about a hardline cop on the streets of America while the news is playing footage of all these protests, and it got me thinking of deeper and deeper and deeper about it than I think perhaps I would have done before. And that's my failing. But the more I read, the more I was shocked and surprised and delighted of how much was chiming between what I was reading in Dredd as I was going through the complete case files and the books and the articles that I was reading that were examining the authoritarian roots of policing and how it has developed over the last few decades. And that's what guided the process. And that is one of the reasons why it was such a difficult process, is because I was learning as I was going along. And each new book or article delineated just another boundary of my ignorance. So it's been a journey for me, and hopefully what comes through in the book is my rising anger. Not that I was ever necessarily pro-police or part of the hang 'em and flog 'em brigade, but I occupy a very privileged, as you do. We're white men.
That's right. Yeah.
So
absolutely. Yeah.
The chances of us coming into a particularly nasty contact with the police are fairly slim. But the more you listen to the voices of people who do come into contact with the police on a regular basis, the more I think if your reaction isn't some kind of anger, then you're not thinking about it properly. Yeah.
No, I think that's a very clear-eyed assessment of the situation, and they are tremendously affecting and interesting and well-constructed themes to explore. I think. I mean, you've quite rightly received a ton of great reviews for the book, which you must be very pleased with, mate. I think it's a sterling endorsement of all that hard work and analysis that you put into creating it.
Yeah, thank you. I was very nervous because who am I? It's this thing about when I do like podcasts and panels and stuff, you've got to have a certain amount of confidence and as you know, showmanship. And I think sometimes people mistake that for arrogance. I mean, we've all got a touch of arrogance, for God's sake. But I think for the first time, really, it was me trapped in a room on my own with this in front of me, and that was a battle. I'm incredibly fortunate. I have a very supportive and understanding and wonderful wife who
Yeah.
was able to support me through that. But you know, I'd do my day job, I'd go downstairs for dinner and half an hour of TV, and then I'd troop back upstairs to this room.
Yeah.
Just and towards the I you know, I was so burnt out towards the end. I was just like, I like literally, I couldn't get my feet up the stairs.
Because it is literally like running a marathon, isn't it? You know, it's that. It's absolutely that. It's the
Yeah.
final 5 miles. That's what that particular zone feels like, right?
Yeah, and unfortunately, the final 5 miles was most most of the process.
Yeah.
But you know, ultimately, it's just you on your own with this thing. And I was talking to a chap who trained as a criminologist, and also knew about comics, a guy called Michael Devine, and he was tremendously supportive and helpful. So I said to him, you know, who am I? I'm just an amateur with opinions. And he just came back and went, yeah, you're an amateur with opinions who's done the reading. You know, you're not just spouting this stuff off on the internet. You know, you it's clear that you've done the reading, and that was incredibly gratifying, because I knew I had. It's just that when you're putting your thoughts down on paper, you're not necessarily have the contextual confidence that you're getting it right.
Yeah.
So you know, whenever I send drafts to people and they turn around and go, actually, yeah, no, I like this, I don't like this, blah blah blah. It's incredibly helpful and gratifying and relieving.
Yeah.
And not that I wanted to write a book that everyone agrees with me on, but I wanted to be honest, and touch on things that are difficult to tackle. There's a whole chapter on the portrayal of race in the Judge Dredd strip, which is not great, but does say something about, I think, race and policing. And so, yeah, like I had a wonderful reception at the Cartoon Museum, like sold out, and you know, everyone laughed at the funny bits.
Yeah, which is all important. I think the work you've done is evident on the page. I think it's completely absorbing, and I think the reviews are well deserved. And for anybody watching the conversation that we just had, this is just scratching the surface of what Michael Molcher is capable of delivering in a conversation about these topics. And so, if you're at anywhere within the vicinity of Forbidden Planet Birmingham on Saturday the 25th at 1 p.m, swing by. He'll not only sign the book for you, but he will deliver you a solid service chat about this very topic that he's devoted years of his life to analysing. And mate, the proof is on the page. It's a tremendous read, you know, and well done for persevering, putting it together, because I think you've delivered something special, which is available, by the way, to order from the links attached to our conversation.
And thank you. That's incredibly sweet and nice of you. I'm also going to be at the Newcastle store on some point in March.
and we will have the dates and the information about that up on forbiddenplanet.com in the very near future.
Yes, he said, looking it up. Where we go? 11th of March, Forbidden Planet Newcastle. There we go.
Wonderful.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, it'll be great, mate. Michael, it's always an absolute pleasure chatting with you, brother, and well done. And I look forward to seeing you on the floors of a convention in the not too distant future.
Yes, well, probably San Diego.
We're at San Diego as well this year, so I'll see you then, if not before, brother.
Wonderful.
Take care, Mike. All the best.
Yeah.
Cheers, mate.
Take care.
If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.